Agreed to drive my son's girlfriend to get an abortion behind her devoutly religious parents' backs, risking family bonds and trust. My name is Anne, and my 17-year-old son, James, has a girlfriend named Mary. James and Mary have known each other since they were little kids, and honestly, they've been practically attached at the hip for as long as I can remember. I remember them playing together on the playground, running between the slides and swings while our families chatted on the benches. Our families have always been irresistibly close. Mary's mom is honestly a lovely woman, devoutly religious, as is her whole family with the single exception of Mary. Despite my atheism and the fact that James takes after me in that regard, Mary's mother has never let it interfere with our friendship. She's never thrown a negative word at me about it. She just accepts us, which I appreciate deeply. A few weeks ago, everything changed. I fell asleep on the living room couch while James and Mary were hanging out in his bedroom. I've made it a point to teach James about sex education from a young age, and, on occasion, Mary would join in those conversations when she needed advice that her own mom felt uncomfortable giving. I always told them experimenting was normal, just to wait until they were older. This was back when they were about 13. Now here we are, they're both 17 and graduating high school soon. I'm not entirely comfortable with them trying things out, but I remember what it was like to be a teenager. I knew the reality, they were going to be having sex. There were rules, though. The door was never to be closed, and Mary had to leave by 11. But that night, I drifted off in the living room. James' father isn't around, left when James was still a small boy, so I've been navigating these moments on my own. The next day, James and Mary confessed to me that they had slept together while I was asleep. They both swore up and down they used a condom. James was practically panicking, even offered to show me the used condom as proof. I'll admit, I checked the trash and, yes, it looked like one had been used and tossed. Still, despite precautions, Mary is pregnant. The irony is hard to miss. She's never wanted kids, she's always been vocal about that, despite her mother's obvious disapproval. James isn't keen on being a dad either, at least not now. She's planned for college, saved up her whole life, and she certainly doesn't want to throw that all away to become a parent at 17. Mary can't tell her parents. That's not an option for her, not in her world. I can understand why. Her parents would force her to have the baby, to raise it, to change her entire future. Even as I remember Mary's mother's kindness, I know in my heart that Mary's parents could very well kick her out, if they found out. Mary and James came to me, almost trembling, and asked if I would drive them to an abortion clinic if they made the appointment. Mary was clear, her parents couldn't know, ever. She begged me to keep this a secret. James is wrecked, crying every night, tortured over the choices and what-ifs. So now I'm sitting here, wrestling with this decision. I'd be the one taking another person's child to get an abortion, but it involves my son, too. It ripples into all of our lives. Part of me flashes back to being their age, knowing deep down I'd likely do the same thing. I blurted out that I needed time to think, but the truth is, I have absolutely no idea what to do. Update 1. I read through every single one of the 300+ responses and took each piece of advice to heart. I realized I should have said from the beginning that I live in Canada. Some people were worried I'd end up in jail for what I'm about to do, but thankfully that's not something I have to worry about here. After weighing everything, I decided, I'm going to take Mary to her appointment. There's no age limit here, she just has to be old enough to understand the risks and sign the paperwork, both of which she's able to do. When it came time to actually arrange things, I ended up having to talk to the doctor over the phone for her. Mary struggles with anxiety, and this situation has been completely overwhelming for her, so I stepped in to help communicate with the office. The doctor said she'll only need to be there for a few hours on the day, and then she can come home. Thanks to an unexpected cancellation, the clinic was able to book her in for this Friday, and the nurses, goodness, they were so understanding and supportive, made the whole process feel just a bit less intimidating. To cover for the trip, I told her mother that I'd be taking Mary out with James to see the mountains that weekend, and that we'd be back by Sunday. Her mom was genuinely thrilled about it and mentioned a getaway would be great for her. The irony is, Mary and James both absolutely loathe camping. They're hardcore introverts who are happiest playing online games together, so the story is almost laughable if you know them. I'm getting everything ready for when we return to my house. I've been scouring the internet for advice on how to help Mary after the appointment. What should I have on hand for her, how best to support her emotionally and physically. I know this is going to be an incredibly traumatic experience for her, and I want to make sure I'm prepared to help as much as I can. Watching my son throughout all of this has been something else. Now that he knows for sure Mary's getting an abortion, he's been handling it better, still worried, of course, but so incredibly supportive. I can't begin to describe how proud I am of him. All of this has brought them even closer. They haven't let 2 days go by without seeing each other. As for what happens after, I'm planning to reach out to their school counselor. I don't plan to share the details of what happened, I just want to get a crystal clear answer about confidentiality. I need to know if Mary can safely talk to the counselor without them running to her parents. If I have to make them sign something to guarantee it, I absolutely will. Because I'm honest enough to admit I am in no way qualified to help her properly through all of this, she's going to need every bit of support she can get. I'll let you know how it all goes after the appointment, or if anything unexpected happens, though I hope, more than anything, that nothing does. Update 2. When you just can't see eye to eye with someone, sometimes there's just no point in arguing. Believe me, I've tried. Anyway, here's what happened. I did end up taking James and Mary to the clinic. Well, sort of. I couldn't quite bring myself to walk in there with them, so instead I drove them to the mall in the center of town, which is just a block or two away from the clinic, and dropped them off. It was a really emotional goodbye. I hugged them both tight and promised I'd be back to pick them up later. Some people have wondered if I would be there inside for the appointment. But by the time it actually rolled around, both Mary and James had already turned 18, and I think it was clear they didn't really want me in the waiting room hovering and worrying over them. And believe me, I'm the definition of a worried mother. It's practically my job description. While they were there, I couldn't just sit still, so I drove around town aimlessly for a while. I even drove past the clinic, half expecting to see protesters holding up awful signs, but to my immense relief, the sidewalks were empty. That was actually my biggest worry, that they'd have to run a gauntlet just to get inside. With the coast clear, I went to Discount Town, I'm calling it that because, well, you know what I mean, and picked up some track pants for Mary. She only had jeans with her and I figured after everything, she'd probably be a lot more comfortable slipping into something soft. Pajama pants just didn't seem right for her. Later that evening, I picked them up and took them back to my place. To Mary's parents, she was camping near the mountains with us. Turns out they hardly even noticed she was gone, since they were busy doing house renovations all weekend and never bothered to text her once. By the time Sunday evening rolled around, Mary had to head back home. She was still in some pain, but she insisted it was manageable. She told her parents she'd just had a bout of food poisoning, and they didn't even question it. Now, of course, I suspect they've added terrible cook to their mental list of my flaws, but what can you do? Since everything settled down, things really have felt normal. I don't feel an ounce of regret. Mary's okay, and James? He's getting a crate of condoms for Christmas. Kidding, but only just. He and Mary both promised me they'll be a lot more careful, and Mary's already looking into her birth control options. Honestly, everything went so much smoother than I ever dared to hope. I kept expecting Mary's mother to show up at my door in a rage, but nothing of the sort happened. And there's more. Mary started seeing a therapist about some of her other struggles. She's got a touch of depression, nothing overwhelming, but she's getting support. She keeps telling me that someday, she'll talk to her parents about all this, just not right now. She's not comfortable yet. Sometimes, I have a hard time believing any of this really happened, that I managed to help like this. But here we are. Update 3. It was almost midnight when my doorbell rang. James beat me to it, tearing down the stairs so fast I thought he'd miss the last step and break his neck, and there was Mary on the porch with a stuffed backpack and that hollow look people get when they've outpaced their own courage. She didn't even say hello, just folded into me and shook. I got her inside, got tea into her hands, and it all came out in bits and pieces. Her mother had been doing laundry and went through the pockets of Mary's jean jacket. There was a folded piece of paper in there, aftercare instructions from the clinic that had been hiding in a seam. The clinic uses a very neutral name, but all it takes is one Google search when your heart is already climbing into your throat. Her mother didn't yell. She just stood in Mary's doorway with that paper in her hand, so gently that it made it worse, and asked, "When?" Mary told her. Then she grabbed her backpack and left. She stayed on my couch that night, pale as the moon and stubborn about it. She didn't want to take my bed, wouldn't hear of me driving back to her house to fix it. James fell asleep on the floor next to the couch, one hand sort of wedged under the leg like he was trying to anchor her to the planet. I sat in the chair and did what I always do, watched them breathe and made plans in my head for every possible outcome. I didn't have to wait long. At 7 in the morning, my phone started buzzing. It was Mary's mother. No texts, just a call. I answered on the second ring and she said my name in this raw little voice I've never heard from her, and asked if she could come over. When she walked in, she looked like she'd been awake all night too. She asked if Mary was safe. I said yes. She stood in my doorway and took off her coat and put it back on again, like she couldn't decide whether she was staying or leaving, and then asked me if I had driven them. I told the truth. I was braced for the explosion I'd imagined 100 different ways. It didn't come. Instead, she sat at my kitchen table and put both hands around her coffee mug and asked me what it had been like. Not in a gory way, just the shape of the day, if they were treated kindly, how Mary had been after. I told her what I could. I told her I drove past to check for protesters and there were none. I told her I went out and bought track pants because it was all I could think to do. She laughed at that, the smallest breath of a laugh, and then the world shifted under our feet. She told me she'd been 19 once and pregnant once, and she had gone to a clinic with a friend who held her hand the whole time. She said it so calmly I almost didn't catch up to it. She hadn't told her husband when they were dating or after. She hadn't told anyone in her family. In her church. She said she had repented 1,000 different ways over the years and built a life where she could avoid that corner of herself, tucked away so deep she forgot it was her. Then she saw the paper in Mary's pocket and it was like walking into a mirror. "I'm angry," she said, her fingers tightening around the mug. "I am. I feel betrayed. By you, by her, by God, if I'm honest, and also grateful. That she wasn't alone. That it was safe. She looked at me like she was trying to see the person she'd sat next to on park benches for years and the person who drove her daughter to an abortion and didn't tell her, and realized they were somehow both me. We talked for a long time. She didn't ask me to apologize, and I didn't ask her to forgive me. There was just the truth on the table between us. She asked if Mary could come home when she was ready. I told her Mary wasn't ready yet, she needed time. She nodded. She said her husband didn't know and that she wasn't going to tell him right now. He'd been at the hardware store when she found the paper and then left for work early. She wanted the first conversation about this not to be a storm, but a bridge. I could hear the tightrope in that. She asked if she could talk to Mary. I went into the living room and asked Mary if she wanted that. She did, if James stayed. I didn't leave them alone, none of us felt quite steady enough for that, so we all sat in my living room together and it was somehow both the most awkward and the most tender thing I've seen in my life. Mary's mother apologized for going through her jacket, said she didn't have a right to that, even as a mom. Mary said she was sorry, too, for lying about the camping trip, about everything. I watched both of them cry. I don't think I breathed for 10 minutes. There were hard things said. Mary's mother told her that she doesn't agree, will never agree, with what Mary chose. She told her there would always be a part of her that grieves what didn't happen. She also told her she loved her, and that didn't change. She said she wasn't going to tell her father right now because she didn't trust him not to make it about anger instead of love. She made me promise, if I ever drive Mary anywhere major again, to tell her, and I said I'd try. Not yes and not no. The truth is these lines are not neat and I don't want to lie to people. I told her I'd try to find a way for us to do this together next time. She took that in and didn't push. After that, the next days were strange and careful. Mary stayed with us for 2 nights and then went home. She texted me the second she walked through her front door. Nobody shouted. Her father was quiet and stiff and avoided her like the kitchen was full of bees. He grounded her for disappearing, took her car keys, then left for a men's group meeting. Her mother walked into her room later with the keys in her pocket and told her to be home by 10 and to text if anything happened. She didn't touch the keys. She just left them on the dresser and walked out. In the middle of all of this, something good managed to find its way through the cracks. Mary got her acceptance letter to the university she wanted, out of province, in a city where she has friends and a program that fits her like it was sewn for her. James got into a school nearby. They sat on my back steps with the envelopes and their sneakers pressed together and did that thing where you don't know whether to laugh or cry, so you sort of do both. Mary's mother came by later that evening under the pretense of dropping off a textbook and hugged Mary so tightly I saw her knuckles go white. She told her she was proud of her hard work, and somehow managed to make that sentence mean exactly and only what it said. There was one more curveball. Mary ended up needing a follow-up appointment, not for anything dire, just to check on some lingering cramping. She asked me to take her. I told her we should ask her mother first. She said she wanted her mother to take her. I don't know if I've ever seen anyone take so much care with a text message. Her mother answered in 2 minutes flat, yes. Tell me when. They went together. When Mary came back by our place afterward, she said nothing about the exam itself. All she said was that her mom held her hand again, like she had when she was little and got her ears pierced, and it was the exact right amount of pressure. This isn't a neat bow. I wouldn't trust it if it were. There are still Sundays where Mary sits through church and watches her father nod along to something that makes her stomach twist. There are still moments where James will catch my eye across the kitchen and I can tell he's replaying all of it in his head. There are still nights where Mary texts me the kind of small questions that mean she's thinking her way through a big one, but there is also a softness where there could have been a crater. There is a mother who walked into my kitchen and told me the oldest secret of her life, and a daughter who walked back into her house on her own 2 feet. I told Mary she can use our spare room anytime, whether it's for a night or a season. She told me she's going to make it to that city in the fall, and that she wants to leave this house in a way that doesn't scorch the ground. I told her I would try to help her with that. That's what we're doing, all of us, I think, trying. It's not pretty. It's honest. And so far, it's holding. Update 4. It was a Wednesday that smelled like burnt toast because James decided he could make French toast without measuring anything and discovered the hard way that cinnamon is not a food group. He was rinsing out the pan when my phone buzzed with an unknown number and the name that came through after I picked up wasn't unknown at all. Mary's father asked if I was home. He didn't bother with small talk. He said my address like he was reading coordinates to someone on the other end of a radio and told me he was on his way. He arrived with his winter jacket open and no hat, breath coming out in little bursts. He didn't cross my threshold at first. He just stood on the porch and asked if Mary was here. She wasn't. She was at home, taking a shower after an exam and sending James a running commentary about whether the hot water was more like a waterfall or a drizzle today. I told him that. He stared past me like he was trying to look into a house from far away. Then he took a folded printout out of his pocket and held it like you hold something you can't decide whether to crumple or smooth. It was Mary's online banking statement. A $35 transaction to the clinic's neutral name from the follow-up. I know, he said, in a voice that didn't have anywhere to sit down. I could feel every possible sentence line up behind my teeth and none of them seemed like the right one. James was behind me, just out of sight, and I could feel him vibrating like a tuning fork. I told Mary's father to come in. He did. He took 2 steps into my kitchen and then stopped at the edge of the rug like crossing onto it would make something official. He didn't yell. He asked me if I had driven her, and I told him I had. He asked me if his wife knew, and I told him she did. He asked me if I understood what kind of betrayal that was, and I told him I didn't know the right word for any of this. He looked at me like I'd spoken a different language. Then he looked beyond me again, and his eyes landed on James. I watched his jaw work. It reminded me of watching men chew ice at hockey arenas when they want to say something they'll regret. It didn't turn into a scene. He said he needed to talk to his family, he needed a godly counsel on it, and he needed Mary to come home right then so they could work this through properly. I texted Mary's mother in front of him and asked if Mary was there. She said yes, and that she was making soup. I asked if I should send her home. She responded with 3 words, "I'm on my way." I showed him the text. He left without zipping his jacket. When Mary's mother came in 12 minutes later, she looked like someone who had been running without moving. We didn't waste time. She said he wanted a meeting at the church office with Pastor Daniel. He thinks it will help to put it in the light, she said, and I watched a little of her old steadiness come back when she said the pastor's name. She asked me if I could bring Mary and just wait in the foyer. "If she asks you to stay, you stay," she said. "If she doesn't, you sit with me after." She was asking me to be there and not be there at the same time. I said yes. The church office has those colored glass windows that make even January look soft. I've been there for bake sale sign-ups and once when James did a food drive and needed me to pick him up. I've never been there for anything that made my heart climb into my mouth and stay there. Mary held my hand all the way from the parking lot to the door and then dropped it when she saw Pastor Daniel open his office, as if remembering she was technically an adult and adults don't clutch. James sat with me on one of those 2 small couches and pretended to scroll his phone. We could hear voices through the door sometimes, not words so much as shapes. Mary's father started with that quiet that is actually louder than yelling. The pastor's voice was low and even. Mary's mother's voice trembled and then firmed. At one point, I heard Mary's voice say, very clearly, "I am not going to repent for something I do not believe is a sin." I watched James close his eyes like he had been waiting for that sentence his whole life. It took an hour. When the door opened, Mary stepped out first. She had that look you get after a wave knocks you over but you found your footing again. She went straight past us to the bathroom without looking up. Her mother came next and she didn't even make it to the couch. She sat on the floor across from me like we were both kids and put her head in her hands. "I told him," she said, voice hoarse. "I told him about when I was 19. I didn't say anything." She didn't look like she could survive my sympathy. Mary's father came out last, face shocking in its blankness. He sat in the chair across from Pastor Daniel's bookshelf and said, to the room more than to anyone in particular, "I don't know my own house." Pastor Daniel put his hand on the edge of the desk and said one of those short sentences that somehow fits more inside than you think, "You can learn." It didn't land. He stood up like he was remembering his body. He didn't meet my eyes. He told his wife he would be sleeping in the guest room for a while. He told Mary she was still his daughter. He didn't say more than that. Sometimes people don't have the words in the moment, they only have the door. After that, things got practical and strange at the same time. Mary's school held prom meetings and handed out those absurdly thick permission slips that make it sound like the kids are going on a trek through the Andes. Mary's father said she wasn't going if she couldn't promise to be respectful of her body. Mary put the form down on the kitchen table and asked him to define respectful. It went sideways fast. Later that night, there was a knock on my door and there were Mary and her mother with a garment bag and a paper sack full of hairpins. We took all the furniture out of my spare room and made it into a department store, and Mary tried on a dress that might as well have been stitched out of her smile. Her mother fussed with the straps and told her she looked like the version of herself that finally matched the inside. When Mary's father texted that she was not to attend, her mother responded with "home by midnight. Text me when you arrive and when you leave. No more, no less." James wore a suit we got secondhand 2 towns over. He stood in my hallway while I safety pinned the back because teenage boys are mysteriously shaped and he refused to wear the belt I suggested on the grounds that it made him feel like a bureaucrat. They took pictures on my front steps and Mary kept looking at her mother like she couldn't believe she was getting to have this and also keep her. They went to the prom and came back sticky with punch and the kind of happiness that makes you talk about everything at once. Mary's father was sitting in his armchair when she got home. He looked at her shoes, then at the text on his phone that she had sent, then at her again, and said, "Thank you for texting." It was the tiniest bridge, and you could still see the river underneath it, but it was something you could step on without falling through. Money started to come up like it always does when kids turn into people with addresses. Mary got residence confirmation from the university and a request for deposits and a cosigner for the supplementary loan she needed. Her father said he wouldn't put his name on anything that would facilitate her running from consequences. Mary looked at the email without crying. She forwarded it to her mother. Her mother transferred what she could and then called me and asked me if I would go with them to the bank. "Not to sign," she said, "but so there's someone else in the room if the man behind the desk decides to give a sermon." We went. The man behind the desk did not give a sermon. He explained interest rates and slid the paper across politely and didn't blink when Mary's mother wrote her name in careful slanted letters. Later that night, there was noise from their house. It wasn't plates breaking. It was the heavy kind of voices that make the walls feel thin. In the morning, the guest room door was closed and the kitchen trash had a lot of tissues in it. Mary's mother dropped by my porch with coffee and said, "He knows everything there is to know about me now. That's either the worst thing that's ever happened to our marriage or the thing that saves it." She smiled in a way that made it clear she didn't need me to answer. The world leaks. Things have a way of getting out even if nobody is trying to push them out the door. An older woman from their church caught Mary and her mother in the parking lot after service one Sunday. She's the kind of woman who has fed half the congregation over the years and has hands like competent miracles. She pulled Mary into a hug and slipped something into her mother's hand. It was a small note. "Me too," was all it said. No date. No details. Just those two syllables, written in blue pen with a little curve at the end of the O like a sigh. Mary's mother touched it like it would disappear. Later she put it in her wallet behind the photo of Mary as a toddler asleep on her father's chest. There were small storms and clearings almost every day. Mary had a day when she bleached her hair in our bathroom and then cried because it came out less platinum and more overzealous canary. I bought purple shampoo and told her she looked like every art student I envied in my 20s. James learned how to make a decent omelet and spent a Saturday making 4 in a row until he got the flip right. Mary's father installed a new lock on the garage door and then immediately took it off again. He started to sit on the opposite side of the pew at church, then slid back beside his wife 2 Sundays later, touching the hymn book with his pinky on the edge like it was an accident. And then there was the box. It showed up on our porch early on a Tuesday. My doorbell camera dinged and there was Mary's father with a banker's box and the same coat he wore the day he came to my door and a face that looked like it had been sanded down overnight. He didn't knock. He put the box down and looked at it like it might do something. Then he walked away. Inside were Mary's childhood books, Goodnight Moon with a torn corner, the Animal Encyclopedia with a banana sticker stuck to Canada, a paperback that had been contraband in their house because it was about a girl who runs away and he'd not liked how much Mary loved it. At the bottom, there was a stuffed rabbit missing one eye. Mary cried like she had finally found a door that opened in both directions. She took the box home that afternoon. Later she told me he had said, "These go with you, wherever you go. They're yours." He didn't say sorry. He didn't have to that day. He had said something else that would do for now. We're packing in stages. There are piles of things in my spare room that look like city blocks, books, sweaters, a ridiculous number of tangled charging cords. Mary and her mother have a shared note on their phones with lists that make my brain tick like a metronome. James keeps threatening to build a flat pack empire when he helps assemble the IKEA bookshelf Mary insists she needs right now. There's a calendar on my fridge with move in circled in red. Every morning, for reasons I can't fully explain, I put my finger on that circle and then take my finger off again like it's going to smudge. I don't know if any of this qualifies as peace. Maybe it's just the absence of whatever kind of war we were all braced for. But it's a thing we wake up to and live in, and some days, when Mary sits at my kitchen table and fills out an emergency contact line with my name and her mother's in the same quick script, it feels like we're building something as careful and fragile and strong as a bird's nest. It might not look like much from far away. Up close, it is warm, and it holds. Update 5. The tape gun screamed across another box and I thought, not for the first time, that if you could measure love in packing tape we'd be set for life. It was raining, the kind of rain that doesn't bother with drops, just a steady curtain that made my driveway look like it was dissolving. Move-in was in 2 days. Mary had divided her life into piles that made sense in her head and looked like modern art in my spare room. James kept arriving in doorways with something else he was sure she needed, a clip-on fan, a surge protector, a mug that said "Oh look, it's coffee o'clock," and Mary kept saying, "I'm going to a university, not war," without convincing herself. The flat tire happened at 4:50 a.m. the morning we left. We were 3 blocks from Mary's house because we'd planned to meet her mother there in caravan. The car did that lopsided dog trot you feel in your bones before you hear it, and then there was the thunk 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 of rubber deciding it had other plans. I pulled over in front of a row of townhouses with porch lights blinking like sleepy eyes, and the 3 of us just sat there for a second in the kind of silence that has edges. Then Mary started to laugh, the brittle kind you laugh when you're so tired all the emotions have crowded into one, and said, "Of course." Somewhere in that span where you look at each other and realize none of you is pretending to know what you're doing, my phone lit up. It was Mary's mother. "I'm outside." She'd left 10 minutes early on a hunch. She pulled in behind us and got out in running shoes and a sweater and a ponytail that made her look like every version of herself at once. She crouched to look at the tire and said the single most competent sentence I've ever heard, "Spare and jack out of the trunk." "Let's go." We were halfway through debating whether the jack was supposed to sit on the rim of the chassis or under the pinch weld when another set of headlights turned onto the street and cut right in behind us. Mary's father got out of his truck in his work boots and a hoodie with his company's logo, like the morning had called a truce and not told any of us. He didn't say hello. He looked at the tire, looked at the jack, looked at us, and then went back to his truck and brought out a breaker bar that looked like it had opinions. "Lefty Lucy is not a suggestion," he said to no one and everyone, and he set himself up and the lug nuts obeyed. Mary held the flashlight on her phone and handed him lug nuts like they were wedding rings. Her mother steadied the car. James got the spare out with that earnest focus teenagers get when they're afraid of putting a foot wrong. I stood aside for once and realized I didn't have a role except bear witness. It was over in 10 minutes. He wiped his hands on a rag and didn't look at any of our faces, just the wheel, and then he did something that felt like tilting the house on its foundation. He opened the back of his truck and pulled out a canvas tool roll, the kind mechanics carry, and pressed it into Mary's hands. For when something stupid happens and I'm not around, he said, almost roughly. Don't use that jack on dirt. Don't trust the pressure at gas stations. And, he stopped. You could see the next sentence queue up and decide to wait. Mary nodded like he'd handed her an heirloom. We drove the rest of the way to their house in a convoy of 4, and there on the porch, like it had been waiting for the moment that wanted it, was another box. This one was smaller and neater, with his handwriting on top, kitchen. Inside were 2 cast iron pans, well seasoned, a stack of dish towels that looked like they'd been folded by the same hands for 20 years, and a recipe card for his mother's spaghetti sauce, faded and splashed and written in that tight masculine script that makes you think of shop teachers. At the bottom, there was a note. He didn't put it in an envelope. Call me if you need to lift something heavy, or if it isn't heavy and you just don't want to do it alone. No apology. The right thing spoken in the wrong place and time until it becomes the right place and time. The drive to the city was 4 hours of weather that couldn't make up its mind. Mary sat in the front with her mother and I drove behind with James, who slept with his mouth open and woke every 20 minutes to say, "You're doing great," like I was the one starting a new life. We stopped at a gas station that sold coffee you could stand a spoon in, and a woman with a toddler on her hip held the door for Mary's mother and said, "Long day?" And the whole section of our life that isn't fit for small talk sat down and stayed quiet and let us pass. Move-in swallowed us whole. The residence lobby smelled like new carpet and raincoats and someone's nervous cologne. A girl at a folding table handed Mary a key and a purple lanyard and said welcome. Like she meant it. Her roommate was a ballet dancer from Vancouver with hair you could ruin out of spite. The two of them did that quick skid and stop you do when your stranger's about to become something else. Mary's mother made her bed with hospital corners like she was trying to promise things she couldn't say out loud. James assembled the IKEA bookshelf and discovered, to his horror, that one dowel was missing. The RA came by with a clipboard and told them the fire drill policy and asked if either of them played an instrument, and I watched Mary's shoulders drop a fraction, like information itself could be a climate you could live in. There was a moment, in the middle of all the bustle, when I walked back to the car to get the tote with the kettle and the good tea, and the sky did that sudden clear thing it does after rain, like a curtain going up. I turned around with the tote on my hip and saw Mary and her mother standing by the window of her room. They were not hugging. They were not crying. They were just looking out at the city like it was a thing they were both inventing out of thin air. Mary reached for her hand without looking and their fingers found each other like they knew the map. We did the last-minute store run you always do to get hangers and a bath mat and a lamp that looked tasteful in the aisle and like a question mark in the room. Mary's father texted once, a photo of the repaired tire and torqued it properly. Mary sent 3 words back, "Thank you, Dad." He responded with a thumbs up and nothing else. It should have been small. It wasn't. When it was time to leave, Mary's mother hugged her the way you hug someone when you don't know when you'll get to say the exact same things again. She didn't say be safe or make good choices or remember to eat. She said, text me when you're worried about something you can't name, and Mary actually laughed. I hugged her too and whispered, if the ceiling looks like it's falling, it's just the freshmen above you rolling their chair wrong, and she whispered back, if I need a track pants run, you're my girl. On the way down the stairwell, we passed Pastor Daniel of all people, a weekend bag over his shoulder and a baseball cap that made him look like a cousin instead of a pastor. He was there dropping off his son, who turned out to live 2 floors down from Mary. Life is rude like that, it refuses to keep its line straight. He stopped when he saw us and took his cap off like we were a flag going by. He could have made some all-purpose gentle comment and moved on. Instead, he said to Mary's mother, I meant it. My door is open for both of you separately and together. She held his eyes and said, we started counseling on Tuesdays. He looked relieved in a way that made me think pastors carry their own boxes of other people's secrets up long flights of stairs and don't complain about the wait. Back at the car, Mary's mother just sat in the passenger seat and put her forehead on the steering wheel for a second. Then she buckled, looked at me, and said, I didn't tell him about the deposit. I told him about being 19. He told me about the girl he dated who disappeared junior year and how he has wondered for 25 years where she went. She smiled a thin, strange smile. We are apparently speaking in a ruined dialect that's still ours. The house was too quiet when we got home. James watered the basil plant Mary had left on my windowsill like it was a pet. Around 10, my phone buzzed. Mary had sent a photo of her desk as she'd finally arranged it. Lamp, the rabbit missing and I propped beside a pencil cup, the tool roll on the shelf like a relic. Unpacked heart, in progress, her caption said. 10 minutes later, a separate text lit the screen. It was from Mary's father. Thank you for keeping her safe when I couldn't see how, it read. No period. Just that sentence standing there like it had been practicing on the porch for days. 2 nights later, a thing happened that nobody planned and somehow held more weight than the official ones. There's a midweek service at their church where people pray for the sick and the traveling and the newlyweds and the names you don't hear the rest of the week. Mary's mother went alone. The women's ministry leader asked for prayer for 3 university students by first name, and when she said Mary, there was a hush like someone had opened a window in winter. An older man in the back coughed. Someone dropped a hymnal. And then the woman with competent miracle hands stood up and said, in a voice that could stand on its own, for traveling mercies and for her to feel loved, because that is how the Lord finds us. It seemed like nothing. It wasn't. On Saturday, James and I did his move in 3 towns over in a residence that smelled like cardboard and male ambition. He hugged me with one arm like he wasn't ready to admit he needed to, and then he did it properly and wiped his eyes on his shoulder and told me not to text him if I saw embarrassing things on his public Instagram. He keeps trying to look taller now that he's not always next to Mary, as if height is a thing you can will by standing next to the microwave with your chin up. He and Mary FaceTimed that night and she took him on a spinning tour of her dorm kitchen and introduced him to a boy named Dimitri who makes pierogies on Tuesdays. He laughed like the room she was in was just another part of the house. And because the world insists on plot lines inside plot lines, on Sunday afternoon there was a knock on my door, gentle enough that it didn't wake my nap but insistent enough that I knew it wasn't a delivery. It was Pastor Daniel's wife. She held a pie like a shield and asked if she could come in. We had tea without small talk. She told me that the deacons had asked her husband to clarify the church's position in a way that sounded like a door narrowing. He had offered to step aside for a season if that would keep the temperature down while they figured out how to be a community that didn't throw their own into the river. She rolled a crumb between her fingers and said, I told him that stepping aside from the pulpit might be less damaging than stepping aside from the people. We'll see if they can tell the difference. Sometimes the real update is that people are braver quietly than the loud ones know how to be. Before bed that night, I opened the freezer to take out chicken for the next day and found a Tupperware labeled with Mary's mother's handwriting. Sauce, the recipe card version, rendered into something you could eat. The lid was fogged and the edges were frosty and I stood there with the door open until the fridge beeped at me like a fussy ant. I sent a photo to Mary with exactly one word, fuel. She sent back a photo of her bowl, noodles slick and red, the rabbit and the tool roll watching like witnesses, and wrote, tastes like a bridge. I turned off the light and let the house be as quiet as it wanted. Somewhere between the spare room with its empty hangers and the calendar with its red circle, the quiet changed shape. It didn't echo anymore. It held.